Excellent. So I'd like to welcome you all to QUT. This is where I work, and thank you very much for coming along to learn together in this smaller community of ECR and PhD delegates. I should say postgraduate delegates, I apologise. So welcome to our beautiful new education building. You all need to go down and have a look at our Instagram moment on level 2 and level 1, the massive sphere. Did everyone see it? Yeah, so take a photo, say hello from QUT, those sorts of things. So thank you very much for coming. As you can see, we've got the Twitter hashtag up there today with the AARE 2019 hashtag. If you are live tweeting, if you're going to tweet, I'm going to be tweeting from the ECR Twitter account. So you can follow along from there. So before further ado, what I would like to do is I'd like to welcome Professor Deb Hayes, who is the President of AARE, to say a few words of welcome as well when she's ready. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, it's so nice to see you all, and welcome to the first day of pre-conference. I just want to say a few things. Firstly, just to acknowledge the fact that this day has been organised by your peers for you. And as an association, we're a voluntary association. And it is great to see that each year so many people come, perhaps for the first time. So who is here for the first time? Anyone? Wow, whew, that is amazing. Well, that's terrific. It reminds me of my first conference, which was in Newcastle. I won't tell you when, but quite a while ago. But when I went to that first conference, there was nothing organised for postgraduates. And I remember running around the conference rooms I think about the second day, and we had blackboards then, writing on the blackboard, post-grad meeting at lunchtime. So we've come a long way. And we're an association that is evolving. And to get to welcome into the association so many new people. And I would encourage you to translate your interest into membership. In the age of subscription, when we all subscribe to so many things on a monthly basis, yearly basis, it's funny that becoming a member of an association seems a bit daggy. I'm not sure what that's all about, but I can really encourage you to think about becoming a member and maintaining your membership. We often get locked in to our own sort of cultures of universities and to who we meet within the corridors and spaces that we occupy. The association opens up so much. It opens up the opportunity to meet people from all across Australia and the world. So it's a great thing to take advantage of. I won't take up much longer, but I just do want to say a couple of things, particularly to you as new members of the association, early career researchers, postgraduates, and so on. For the first time this year, we have asked everyone participating in the conference to sign a code of conduct. And I want to reinforce to you in particular that every member in the organisation, no matter what their status, is expected to behave well and expected to treat everyone with respect and according to the code of conduct. So don't think that because someone might be a professor or someone you've read about and are a bit starry-eyed about meeting, that happens to me still, it doesn't mean that they can, when I say it happens to me, I mean I meet people who I get starry-eyed about. And I'm saying that is, don't think that because there's someone important, they're allowed to behave differently. They're not. So you can expect the same degree of respect from any member of the association, no matter what their status. So please keep that in mind. If at any point you encounter behaviour towards yourself that you feel is inappropriate, that makes you in any way feel unsafe, then please let me or one of the committee members or someone you trust know. It's not to be tolerated. And it's important that we all understand that, and that you know if you do experience it, and just because we have a code of conduct doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But be prepared and know that you will be well supported to take action if anything like that does happen. So, having said that, and I think it's important to say it, I again just want to say welcome. What a fantastic building this is. Oh my God. So enjoy the day. I know that you're going to, I know it's a fantastic plan that you've got, and you'll see people sneaking in throughout the day to be part of it. So have a great time. And I do just want to, on your behalf in particular, thank Naomi, and where's Rosie? Rosie? And of course, where's Amanda? She's not here. So the three of you in particular, pass on our thanks to Amanda as well. It's great. It's all voluntary work, and let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks very much, Deb. It's been a real pleasure working with the committee at AARE, and one of the people in particular it's been a real pleasure working with is Dr. Melita Hogarth, who who's been a wonderful help as well in helping me organise these events. And I'd like to invite her now today to introduce our first keynote speaker, Angela Barney-Leitch.
Yamagara Nindali, Melita Naya, Gamilaroyana. Thank you, my name's Melita and welcome. I'd like to take this opportunity to also acknowledge that we are on the Turrbal and Yagara lands and that the sovereignty for this land was never ceded. Angela. It is with great pleasure in my role as on the Executive Committee for AARE, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Research SIG Chair, wearing many hats, that I get to introduce the very amazing and deadly Professor Angela Barney-Leitch, who is the QUT Pro Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Strategy, a position she commenced in February 2019. Ooh. She is a Wapabara Guami uncle. Ganami. There you go. His country is the Keppel Islands off the coast of central Queensland, Australia. As Pro Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Strategy, she is responsible for providing leadership in developing the strategic direction of the university regarding Indigenous matters, including institutional policy, strategy and advice in relation to all aspects of Indigenous higher education at QUT. The position plays a critical role in engaging within the university, external stakeholders and Indigenous communities to establish effective and productive relationships. Professor Barney-Leitch ensures alignment of all related Indigenous initiatives and activities with the university's overall strategic direction. Angela has, that doesn't sound very formal, does it? Angela has significant experience in Indigenous Australian education and strategic policy. Prior to joining QUT, Angela was the Director of Indigenous Policy and Strategic Innovation for the Queensland Department of Education. In that role, she was responsible for leading the strategic development of education policy on Indigenous issues within Queensland. She has been the Chair and Queensland Representative on the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Advisory Group, where she provided strategic policy advice to the National Education Council. Angela holds a Bachelor of Administration, a Graduate Certificate in Employment Law, and a Masters of Education and Professional Studies Research from Griffith University. Can you please all join me in welcoming Professor Angela Barney-Leitch?
I think I need to shorten that a little bit. I think I can, I'm just testing whether I can see with this one or this one. Probably this one's better. It's really good to be here. I love being amongst people in education. I always find that the people in education are so lovely, and people really want to work together, which is a wonderful thing, I think. First thing I want to do is acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I think I'm supposed to do something. Just hold a sec. Oops, not that one.
I put yours on there.
Oh,
I'll do it for
what
you.
am I doing?
I apologise. Don't worry, do. There you go. Sorry about that.
I don't hold any qualifications in IT. So I'll just recognise the Turrbal and Yagara people as the First Nations owner of the land where QUT stands. I pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and I recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning. I recognise the role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the university and in the wider community. I acknowledge that the lands on which we stand today have always been places of learning, research and engagement. As the Pro Vice-Chancellor for QUT, I'd just like to welcome you all to this fabulous building in our beautiful campus. This is the education building, and I think when you look at this building, it shows what education means to QUT. It's really important to us that people who research in education and become teachers really feel that they're welcome and recognised on our campuses, because teachers have such an important role to play in our society. So yesterday I started thinking about what I was going to talk about and what some of you'd want to hear. And I started to go into all the theory that I had in the paper, and then I thought, it wasn't good. Then I thought, oh no, I've been working in social policy for 20 years. I've been working in education policy in state and national level for 12 years. And in that space, I interacted a lot with research and with researchers. And so I thought what I'd actually talk to you about is what it's like to work in that space and how I've interacted with researchers over that time, and probably some tips for how you can go about doing research with education departments. So while I'll reflect, and it's quite reflective on what I'll talk about, and I'll give you some examples as we go through, I will actually talk a little bit about some theory, and I will just throw out some people that I actually have read around this who I think kind of know what they're talking about. And when I say that, it's because I've worked in policy so long, sometimes I read research and I go, yeah, wish it was like that, but it's not. So I thought I'm going to actually sort of be fairly blunt with the way things happen in education. So when I talk today, and I really want to thank you actually before I start for undertaking research in this area. It's really vital that research is undertaken in this area, particularly, I think, for equity groups. We really need to make a bigger difference than what we currently are to the outcomes of not only Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but low SES people, migrants, people who speak English as a second language. There is so many areas that we need research and we need good outcomes. So today I'm going to use the term policymaker, but what I'm really talking about is policy officers and advisors who work within the education departments. Because these are the people that when the ministers say to them, this is the way I want to go, they're the ones that then write the policy. They're the ones that make it into reality by writing the briefs and the statements, the media releases. etc. So I'll focus on them rather than the politicians, because this is most likely the area that you will interact with, which will be those policy writers or makers. So while policymakers and researchers kind of have the same goal around making the world, I suppose, a better place in education, in the literature they talk about them as being very, very different. And I have to say we both have the same goals, we both want the same outcomes, and sometimes it can be quite adversarial, but that's not how any of us really want it to be. So people talk about us as living in parallel worlds, the researchers and the policymakers, but that doesn't mean that we never talk to each other, that we're kind of ships in the night and we never really interact. In fact, policymakers do interact with research. However, formal research is only one of the tools that they use. As a policymaker, you face constant pressures all the time. The ministers change their mind, there's community coming in, there's influencers talking to you all the time. So you often need to gather information very, very quickly, and it's often highly charged political areas, and there's very short deadlines. So it's very difficult when we interact with researchers sometimes and they say, oh, we can give you the answer to that in 3 years. I've got a brief I've got to do and give to the minister by Friday. So that it gets a bit worrying at that stage. So that's when you have to go and actually look at researchers already out there. So what we do in that situation is we develop strategies from our previous experiences or previous problems that we've had. And I say we, I'm talking about the policy officer. Although I've kind of transitioned into the PVC role, these sort of methods speed up the processes of finding a really satisfactory solution within a short period of time. And these shortcuts kind of assist policy officers to come up with a rational way of coming up with some prioritising evidence to form a solution for the minister or the Director General. So the Director General is the person in charge of the department. So, but contrary to perhaps popular belief amongst researchers, policy officers rarely develop policy without any evidence. To gather evidence, we were constantly undertaking small literature reviews, develop surveys, complete desktop audits, facilitate focus groups, we write and read consultation reports. A key problem, though, is that when we usually do this, the problem's already been defined. So as Lomas and Brown state, many policy officers do not look for any evidence in problem definition and only rely on personal experience. I should have stapled this. And our links with researchers and people we trust rather than rigorous, sophisticated evidence from wider research. That we do. In fact, research by Carney and Oliver indicate that researchers have low relevance in problem-defining areas. So when researchers come into the picture, the critical focus on the policy has already been established. So I'll give you an example, which is not surprising because I worked in Indigenous policy quite a lot, is around school attendance. So what's happened in the past is the minister has said there is low Indigenous attendance or low SES attendance, and that was gathered from our own data, and it's not difficult to get that data. So the minister stands up and says, we need to focus and improve attendance, and we're going to do this by focusing on the students. So then policymakers sit there and they start working by focusing on the students and focusing on their families. Then they start looking at researchers who write about what we can do with the student and what we can do with the family. And then a program gets rolled out, focusing on the student and the family. We never actually look at, is the problem the student or the family before we start writing the policy. And we don't start talking, and we don't invite researchers in who say, we should be looking at the system. We should be looking at the teachers. We should be looking at the society in which these students are based. So the researchers that we bring in are coming in after we've decided This is what we're going to focus on. So the problem's been defined and the direction has been decided, and there's not a researcher in sight. And that is a common thing in the public service. So Carney and Oliver argue that part of this issue is that there is limited evidence that researchers understand policy formation, or they appear to draw on outdated models that believe policymakers use well-ordered stage of policy development, coupled with the belief that researchers can reduce the bounded rationality of policy making through their evidence. Unfortunately, policy is less ordered or defined than that. And I've seen a lot of diagrams that show, this happens here, and then the minister says this, and then they hand it over to the policymaker and they do this, and then they gather research and whatever. It's never like that. It never, ever is. You can be going along one track, then all of a sudden it changes. There could be something that comes out in the news. There could be a change of minister. You know, there's a wide range of individuals that influence policy that pop up and say their views. Alan Jones could be one of them. You know, and there are close relationships between powerful and prominent individuals in the community and ministers. And there's a tendency for widespread community views or election timeframes to dominate. So as we're getting closer to timeframe, we go into this caretaking mode, we've got to get it out. Because 6 weeks before election, we cannot put any policy out. You know, so we need to get it out now. So things happen like that, and you never know exactly when that's going to be called. So add to this the current academic experts that policymakers engage with, and we do have some, like Hattie is quite often the person people call on. The union views, specialised media and interest groups, and what becomes evident is that space between research and policy is kind of not empty. There's not this gap that's there. It's actually really, really crowded and overflowing. So not all researchers are connected to or knowledgeable of this system. And Mendezabel reasons that this is often the impression, there's often an impression that there's a gap in the research when there actually may not be one. So when I was in the Education Department earlier this year as a policy director, I heard complaints quite often about researchers, and personally in opinion pieces and in letters to the government, some to our minister, some to me, that our government policies were not research or evidence-based. It was said so often that we started writing in our policies and strategies, etc., that our decisions are and will be evidence-based. And that was essentially to support the minister when they stood up and said this is evidence-based. And it was evidence-based, but unfortunately a lot of the researchers making these statements about no evidence, it was quite often the case that policymakers, which is us, were basing their policy decisions on research, just not their research. So I think one of the biggest lessons for some early career researchers in this area, hopefully I know what I'm doing, yes, is that your research evidence doesn't guarantee policymakers' demand. And that's a bit of a hard lesson to learn because, you know, you've done this research for 3 years and you've finished your PhD and you've gone out and talked to all these communities. And in the end, the policy makers don't care. At least that's the way it feels. That you're not actually thinking, I'm not actually making a difference here. So it's not just a matter of build it and they will come, or do the research and they will come. Sometimes they're going elsewhere in a different direction and you're not aligned with that direction that they're going in. The fact that many researchers are not connected is not necessarily the fault of researchers. Not all researchers have the policy networks or know how to connect with them, are the best at communicating. Sometimes researchers need to bring somebody with them who can actually explain their research better than what they can. And not many policymakers have unlimited time to connect with researchers. And I can say in my position, I rarely got a phone call from a researcher saying, hey, I'm looking at doing this, what do you think? Will somebody ring me? Never got called. People would be putting in research applications in Indigenous policy, not ring me. I found that it was really amazing. I've been to university and I say, ring me if you want to know anything. Never one phone call, none. And I was a policy director for probably 7 years. So rather than working out how to bridge the gap between research and policy, it's better to navigate the map, I think. Navigate the roadways. So yesterday I started thinking about what would be my tips for if you wanted to interact and have your policy and have your research heard. So I've put together 13 tips. I tried to make it really trending, 12 or something. Anyway, ended up it's 13. Lucky for some, I think. Well, that might be number 7. Anyway, and then I tried to make this PowerPoint more deadly than what it is. So my first tip is timing. So one of the tips, it really is timing. If the government of the day, elected by the people, are right-leaning, then policymakers and writers who are public servants who implement the direction of government are not going to use left-leaning researchers whose ideologies are different to the current government policy positions, no matter how convincing you think your research is. It will be next to impossible to use it as a platform for major policy. This is particularly the case when there's political issues. So when we're talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues, minority group issues, unemployment policy, they are not looking for left-leaning, and the other way around as well. I'm not just having to go at the right. This goes both ways. In these cases, I think it's better to use like the bottom drawer approach. This is where I, as a policy director, would put policy ideas or research ideas that come and go, this has really got merit, but this is not the way the government's going. And so I'd kind of stick it in my bottom drawer and wait for the political climate to change. And waiting for maybe there's a change in minister, because a different minister in the same government can think differently. So it might be a change of minister. Or there might be a different change in context, something's happened, and then you're able to pull it out. So I think sometimes it's, you need to think about, do I want to go hard in this? Do I want to engage at this point when it's going to be counterproductive? Because when the world changes and I put mine up, there'll be other people there who will listen more to me. So I'm not going to be seen as someone who's trying to influence now. But one of the things you can do other than just shelving it is go and talk to influencers. So while we mightn't talk to the researchers, we talk to a lot of non-government organisations, and every government wants to talk to non-government organisations. They want to be seen to be talking to them. So influencing is not just about yourself being up front. Use non-government organisations, unions or specialist groups, which can be influenced by your networking and research building, because in the end it's about the research, right? Not about the researcher. That's what we want to get out there. So, and that's about identifying your opportunities, which is kind of linked to the timing. So there are times when opportunities occur and research will be sought. Some of these are during political changes, just before and just after elections. The politicians are looking and people are looking for new ways of doing things. The other thing that happens is after serious failures, like the pay debacle in Queensland Health, or when the government's responding to unplanned national or international issues. There's also major reports and Senate inquiries. So in Queensland, we had a Productivity Commission inquiry into remote community service delivery. It was out there. Everybody knew that it was happening. When it's done, there's timing that happens with those. They get 6 months to do up their report. Then they give it to the government. The summary came out. They give it to the government. The government has 6 months to respond. During those 6 months, when the summary was out there, did not get contacted by one researcher saying, read the summary, got an idea for how we're going to do that. I was on the senior government's group that sat down and talked about how we would go about implementing and putting that in place, talking to DATSIP. DATSIP hadn't been contacted by any researchers and didn't have any researchers to hand that they could talk to. So part of it is kind of looking at what's out there and saying and getting ahead of the game. One of the things is a good tip, I think, is that the opposition parties are usually not as well resourced as the one that's in government, and they're much more malleable in their thinking and looking for ideas that'll help them win government. So that's actually a good connection for people. Executive summaries. I put those exclamation marks because this is mega important. Mega important. One of the things that researchers who are well connected with policymakers and senior politicians know is that they don't read the report. They rely on the executive summary and recommendations being very succinct. That's in there. They rely on their staff or networks to give summaries of the rest of the information that's in there. So if you think, oh, look, everything's in the report, I'll just do a brief summary in my executive summary or a little bit of an introduction, and it doesn't really need to be research. Just in that, you've almost guaranteed that your research will not be read. Just in that. The amount of people I've worked to with politicians, senior officers, they just read the summary. They'll quote back to me what's in the executive summary up the front, but if you say, but Minister, what about page, or DG, what about page 67 where it had this? Nothing. Nothing is there. They've read the executive summary. Make sure that is really good and really comprehensive and includes your recommendations so they don't need to go searching through the report. They can print off those front 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes people give 20, front pages with the recommendations, because that I can attach to a report to the Minister that gives a brief, or the Director General that gives a brief overview of the rest of the report, but they will not read it. I had one Minister who said, if you give me something that's more than 2 pages, I will not read it. Really, really complex issues, you've got to sum up in 2 pages. So I need to be able to read that summary and go, oh my God, what am I going to put in from this? And if it's really good, they may go there and read the rest of it. Their advisor will read the rest of it, but they won't read the report. So include case studies and stories about people and the problem and the research impact on individuals. These are the human stories that draw policymakers in. They love stories. That's senior policymakers and politicians love these stories. They quote the stories constantly. You've seen politicians stand up there and go, but the mother in, Woodridge with 3 kids, this is the impact on them. That's the story they need to give you, because they'll remember that. They won't remember all the stats that you've given them, but they'll remember the mother, and this is what happened to the mother, and then they'll endlessly quote that forever. Anyway, but this is the thing that makes them engage with your research. So I think it's because people are predisposed to listen and engage with stories. It's something that happens. We're fairly young, we get told stories. So they come up with a good story. Oops. So tell the why and the how. So it might surprise many of you that policy officers routinely undertake literature reviews, usually fairly small ones and non-available research. We develop surveys, which you'll see in a lot of government websites. We complete desktop audits, facilitate focus groups, write consultation reports, and interpret and collate quantitative data. which is from census or other kind of data. And we can gain assistance in this, at least in the Queensland Education Department, from staff with PhDs that focus on statistics and data analysis. So we rarely need researchers to take our data and analyse it, particularly with our short time frames, and unless the researcher plans on applying a new lens or theory, which we won't ask them for, by the way, they'll need to get our data and then tell us this is what the data says. We don't need you to tell us our data. It's very, very comprehensive. We've got all of that. But what data doesn't tell us is why this is happening and how this is happening. You cannot give policymakers data or produce evidence that we already can produce ourselves. So Wolf's study on relevance outlines that researchers often use the resources that could be shifted to addressing why and how questions to the what, and that they put too much faith in this type of relevance to policymakers, and that researchers believe the what implies the how. While this research can have immense value, both on their own, particularly if it's in a new area of data, and as precursors for the why and the how questions, the what publications alone do not typically assist the education policy officers on why that outcome occurs and how to address it. And that's what we want to know. The same can be said for the counter-narrative publications that do not include enough critique, analysis, or theory of the counter-narrative to assist us to say, well, okay, if that's happening for that group of students, why is that happening for that group of students? So it's like it doesn't really help us at all. The main two types of research required are why and how. Why do people think and act this way? Why does this activity have particular consequences? And how can the processes, current programs and policies, people's attitudes or behaviour be changed? So Wolf outlines 5 areas researchers should achieve in developing research to impact policymakers. These 5 areas are fairly self-explanatory as policy officers. If researchers would be able to produce articles using these 5, then it would be kind of policy nirvana. We could probably just get it and go, okay, that, then we'll do that, then we'll do that, then we'll do that. So these are the 5. Generate new ideas about what works or what accounts for policy relevant effects. Gather ideas about the way mechanisms work for different people and in different circumstances. And in education, you really need to do urban, rural and remote. Reveal the indirect mechanisms at work in the policy system, because when you're down deep in it, you don't know what they are. And reinforce a realistic view of causality that supports timely action. Now, this might sound like publication 101, but quite often, as a policy director, I didn't see these in the reports or articles that were sent to me or that I read. Number 6, include recommendations that needs more research. Longitudinal study is required. I can't give you recommendations because it's all context specific. That just guarantees that that would be put aside. State a direction, what needs to be done, or at least principles and a framework for progression. If there's no clear directions or recommendations, we'll move on to another researcher that gives us those. Because remember, you've got no time. We haven't got time to ring back up that and say, oh, who was that who wrote that? Oh, which university are they at now? Ring them up, get the voicemail, always get the voicemail. You haven't got time to do that. Include recommendations. Number 7, networking events. So focus on the bigger picture outside of the belief policy process that allow you to have more influence, which is kind of what I was saying before. Have an understanding of who you're competing with, who to develop alliances with, and who to influence outside the policy makers ourselves. A focus on getting your evidence to central policy makers alone may not provide the solution to researchers having an influence. Attend networking events of people in your field, events at NGOs and think tanks that are linked to your research. Keep an eye on the department website. Departments quite often say what they're doing on those websites, and they invite people in to come and talk about research at a particular time. Quite often the Queensland Education Department does. Now, you mightn't have been invited to do the research, but if you go there and talk to them and then ask, can you present, 9 times out of 10 you'll be presenting at the next gathering. So go to them and talk to people at those events and ask if you can be a future speaker. Not surprisingly, but people who are in a similar field who attend the same universities are better connected than those who don't. So policy and decision makers who attend your university come to university for events. The education faculty here runs forums. People from the public service come and attend those. You need to be aware who's in the room, because the better connected you are, the higher the chances of new valuable connections, and as a consequence you know more about the system and you get knowledge and you know how to use them. Oops. Involve policymakers in research, design and governance. So I'm going to tell you a story now, which is a bit of a horror story for a researcher. So a researcher, and I won't name them, I won't actually say what they were doing, but they got an AARE grant. It was about $365,000, so it was a significant grant. It was the education one. And as part of their grant, they were going to talk to 5 different schools. They had tied their research very tightly to these 5 different schools. They got their funding. The university put out that they got the funding. They were really happy. This is their first big grant. And then they came to us and said, here, I want to go to these 5 schools. And I said, no. We had planned a lot of things to happen in those 5 schools over the next couple of years. There was a lot of activity, and there was a decision made by the department earlier and by those schools that we would not have any more research done in those schools over the next couple of years. We said to them, we can maybe give you some other schools that you can go to. But they said, I've tied it to this. And we said, that's not our issue. You should have come and talked to us before you put that grant in. They had to go back to the ARC and talk to them that they couldn't get into those schools. What happened was they ended up giving a proportion of the funding back to the ARC and had to use a couple of other schools. That was really embarrassing for them. We couldn't help them because that decision had been made, and we had said to them, why didn't you come to us beforehand? And, you know, it was really bad, and what happened was we could just then move on, but that was really shameful for that person. They had to tell their university that, they had to tell their colleagues that. And the ARC knew that. So if you're going to do research in a school or in a region and you're putting in a grant, go and talk to them first. There's been times too where people have come who are doing their honours, who are doing their PhD and come in and have said, I want to do this. We've got to the ethics that they've put into the department and we've said no. We always try and work with people as much as we can, but we've had to say no because ethically it doesn't work. We've had an honours student halfway through their honours come to us, say they want to talk to 5-year-olds about a particular issue, and we just went, oh my God, and the methodology was all wrong and you can't talk to 5-year-olds in that way, and, you know, we couldn't support their honours, they were halfway through. Please come and talk to us. So, No policy is new policy. So usually policy is, I know you're all absorbing that right now. Anyway, policy is usually built on changes or modifications to existing policy or on reports or investigation kind of outcomes. It's rare that a policy is completely new. If you want to influence policy, have a good understanding of what the current policy is, because policymakers prefer to modify or massage policy rather than completely rewriting one. If possible, attempt to interpret or explain how your evidence fits with pre-existing beliefs or paradigms. So I've got another story here. So, I won't mention that person either, but it was around language. The Department of Education had developed something around language. We had talked across the state, thousands of people, talked to a number of regions, brought in a large number of experts, and developed this program around policy. And we were rolling it out, around language, we were rolling it out across the state. So we were about 3 years into it. And I got sent a letter by a researcher who had worked in 3 schools on a similar language issue. And they said they had the answer. And they listed it all out. And it was 3 schools that we hadn't got to yet as part of the rollout. So they'd done a lot of work. They'd come up with how they would train people in this new area. They'd come up with, PowerPoint slides. They'd done a whole heap of work. And we had to say to them, we cannot take that on. They said, oh, well, maybe I can come and present. No, you can't come and present. We have developed this huge policy, this huge program. And that is what we're rolling out. We do not want you to confuse the schools. We need consistency across our schools. We need people implementing the same kind of policy. Our program that we had done was based on 1,000 people, I think, had input into that. We had experts from around the country. You've looked at 3 schools that we haven't got to yet. And so what happened with theirs is they were able to write and journal articles, etc. on it. That was fine for them, but no impact whatsoever because we couldn't take it on. You need to have a look at what the departments are putting in place at the time and talk about, now you've got that, this might be able to tweak this a little bit and assist or kind of work with you, but don't just ignore what's there because they won't listen to you. So choose a content area. So you should choose a content area for your research and influence to become known for that, because policymakers tend to have a general area of knowledge or expertise, and researchers need to be able to offer a deeper, more thorough understanding than what the policymaker has themselves. So in my area, we had people worked on early childhood, people worked on, young transitions, people, a range of different things. So if you worked in early childhood, you read the early childhood literature, you talked to people in the early childhood, you went out and visited early childhood centres. So when you come and talk to a researcher, you want them to say more than what you know. So being a generalist is typically not good when you come to the public service or try and interact with the public service and the policy, because they can just go and talk to 5 people who've probably got a similar amount of knowledge that you have. That probably sounds arrogant, anyway. And they can also go and talk to schools, and they can go and talk to principals, and they can go and talk to regions. And so you need to be able to say something different than they do, and have something more deep and a better understanding of what's going on. So you need to undertake research, take under research with the departments, which includes schools and regions. This will give you a good opportunity to meet with departmental officers. Now, they loosely kind of monitor the research in that when is it going to be finished on time. They don't actually worry about too much what's kind of in there, although if you're doing ethics with us, We will ask what your methodology is. We will ask who you've consulted around this. We'll ask what your expertise is in this area. Go and have a look at there's a national application that people can put in. I think it's on the AARE site, which sort of sets out what we'll look at. Don't not fill in an area, because we will send it back to you to fill it out. So even though ethics and approvals will feel kind of frustrating, if you actually do it with the department, they will disseminate the information at the end to people within the department. They will call you in to give talks at different times during the year. And in Queensland, we have a database that all that research goes on. So policy officers can look up in that database to see if anyone's written anything in that area. And that's because they've done research with us. So I've got develop a one-pager of key research in the area and include your own research. And when you make a connection with a department, give it to them. Here's the one-pager. Because policymakers do not have access to extensive databases which are available to university staff, sometimes we can't, you get into the library, it's fantastic. A lot of policy officers don't have that kind of access to those kind of articles. So when someone gives you, here's a rundown of the recent research in the area, it's kind of like, yes, I'll go and I'll follow up on this one, or I'll follow up on that one. So your one-pager can be extremely useful in kind of leading where they will go. The last thing I got is published, which is kind of like a no-brainer, isn't it? But it kind of goes without saying. It's hard to quote something that's not there. It's hard to attach a 2-page article to the minister's brief. That's easier than saying these are the ideas that someone kind of has. And we can put links to publications in reports and websites, and we do put it in some of the briefs that go up. So Minister, if you're interested, here's a link to that article. But if there's no article there, they're not interested. So you need to publish, because they also need to be able to quote you. Oops, I think that's it. So I'll give you these tips for your research to have policy impact in a crowded space, because as a previous policy director who wanted to write good policy, this means we do need to engage with research, and we do need to engage with researchers and new ideas. So even when, like I was saying, even when I went out to a university and said, please come and see me, no one did. Please come and see them. Go and see them. So I've got 2 final comments. So it's important to understand how research and policy interacts, because research does influence policy, and a research knowledge is kind of knowledge of the system, the players, and the influence that those players have is critical to having an impact. And having a roadmap and a plan will assist in putting your researchers' knowledge into action. So my final comment, however, is that because networks are largely based on relationships and connections, it makes sense that some of you may not directly impact or be engaged with government policy, particularly at the politician kind of level. So in some ways you need to be satisfied with contributing to the public narrative. Go and get on Twitter, go and get on Facebook, put a blog out there. As policy officers, we looked at blogs. We looked at what's happening on Twitter. So go to the public narrative, influence the literature through your publications, and if you're a lecturer, shape service delivery and lay the foundations for future leaders and future influencers. So in some ways, you are still influencing policy, just in the longer term. So while policymakers and researchers can be seen as living in parallel worlds or ships passing in the night, we're more or less heading in the same direction, and there's actually a roadmap to prove it. Thank you. took 45 minutes in my thing.
So what we might do is it's being recorded, and also some people at home.
Sorry. I know in Victoria, one of the frustrations that I've had with trying to access policymakers is that our department organisational chart has secretaries, deputy secretaries and executive directors who are often incredibly busy people, and we probably need to get to the people sort of a tier or two down to then get FaceTime with an ED.
Yep.
Do you have any advice?
So I think that, and the other thing is, has anyone looked at the conference list? Okay. If you look at the delegates, sometimes they sneak themselves in there. So you can go and have a talk to them. So going a couple of levels down and writing a letter sometimes actually works, and saying that you're available. Writing a letter sometimes to the Director General and saying what's available works, although people won't like you when you do that. But to get to that level, that's what part of the networking and the influencing is about. Those people go to meetings, those people go to conferences at that level and get information. If you start looking through the organisational structure, it lists names. Then you go with those names, you look them up, and stalk people, look them up, go, oh, you know what? They're a member of these different organisations. I want to go to that next meeting and make sure I meet with them. So it's a little bit by stealth like that. But also, if you see that they're looking at a particular academic, they might be nice to you and actually introduce you. They might not. So it's about being where they are. I'm saying stalking them and find out where they're going to be, and actually writing letters to them, because we do read the letters. And the letters do get put on the system, and quite often you need to respond to them. The other thing is most departments have a research area. And if you write to that research area and say, look, this is the kind of research that I'm involved in, is it possible to get time to talk to someone? When I got letters like that, which was never. But sometimes I got letters from people outside of my area saying, will you meet with them? I'd go, yeah, okay, I'll meet with them. It's nothing to meet with people for half an hour. But I never got a letter saying they wanted to meet with me. Well, they wanted to meet with me when I said no to their research and applications. Do I just point, or is someone else pointing around?
First of all, thank you for the presentation.
No worries.
I'm not from this country. I consider myself a positivist, sometimes a very naive person. But you open my brain into several pieces, so I'm trying to put them together back, as well as my heart. So I'm going to try to make sense of what I'm just going to pose here as a way of, I don't know, learning from people and with people, I guess. So I'm in my second year of a PhD, and time is always an issue, because we are juggling between different things. I left the classroom a couple of years ago, but I love the classroom. So I'm working with two researchers, one highly busy, the other one very busy as well. But these researchers, whenever I say, this is an intervention, do you mind coming to the classroom to take a look or participating on this? They normally say yes, if I tell them in advance. And they collaborate a lot. They like to collaborate. But then some certain moments in Australia, I feel like I'm rushing and there's no time and it's already 5 o'clock, so we gotta go to the family. We gotta go to different other things. So I tend to move slower normally. So if you think outside research and policy and you think about international development projects, when you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to be giving away resources, not for my country, but to a developing country, there has been a shift on just deciding from Washington or different other parts, but then participatory international development participatory planning. So policymakers, researchers, people in the ground, they go to the places, they live there for a while, and then they start doing kind of an engineering, background engineering towards what is it that they're thinking about the policy. So they go to the place and they collaborate, they live and they understand reality, and they're not just drafting policy from their beautiful desks or the hotel where they're staying before they go for a few hours and then they're gone to their own reality. So to what extent technology is enabling us, and then that idea of I don't have time, to really get connected with reality, because policies are normally drafted due to a problem, and you want to solve that problem, and you said something else. Policy and research is there. It's not about the politicians or the researcher. It's about what happens in the ground and how policy will affect, and it's about making a better world, a more peaceful world. So time, collaboration. Do I want to be, is vanity? Do I want power, or what is it that I want to live in this world?
Well, in Australia, most policies made from behind a desk. We don't actually, they look at the research that other people have done. But in saying that, it's not completely. They do hold usually focus groups and go out and meet with people, just not comprehensively, because they are time poor as well, which is why they rely on academics and researchers to come up with those answers. The problem is we want the answer now. So that's something that the researchers and policy officers grapple with all the time, trying to get that answer. We actually put out for longitudinal studies, but we'd want something as you go through. You need to tell us stuff as you go through that we can use. So it's a very different story here than overseas, I think. One of the things too, if you want, just when you're talking about schools, principals always want people to do research with them. Remember that. Go out. We had a principal that we were working with around mobility of students, and he loved the research so much, he flew himself to Canberra and went and started talking to politicians. Principals will ring up their regions and they'll ring up central office and say, I'm doing this really great program. Principals have rang me and told me what they're doing. So you need to get in good with the principals, because the principal can be your best friend and they can help navigate you through the system when you're talking about state education. In the Commonwealth government, it's really different because they're not responsible for schools, although they think they are. And we have those debates all the time. But when it comes down to it, it's really, because the Commonwealth holds the purse strings, really, gives the state money and puts in what they want. But it's really, I think, the states where you should really focus a lot, because even those discussions that we have with the Commonwealth around the funding, when we start talking about what funding Queensland was going to get for particular issues, we developed our arguments for those discussions, and we based those arguments, the last ones, on our data and researchers that we had worked with to go in and argue. And what happened was the Commonwealth came up with some principles, but what Queensland put in place underneath was kind of up to us. So if you really want to influence education, it's more about influencing the state that you're in and the state, because they deliver the programs.
Had their hand up before.
I feel like the air conditioning's not on, and it's not. I start to look for the little lights.
Hi, Angela. I have a very quick question. I'm doing Queensland research into Queensland State Schools, so I went through the Department of Education, And I'm just wondering, when you're doing research in schools, that might be a little bit critical. So I'm looking at data and assessment practices in schools. If you want to engage with the department and present at their events, is if you're coming from a bit of a critical angle and you're kind of seeing what's maybe not going so great, is there a way to soften the blow, or is there a way to kind of still work with the department while critiquing things happening in the state school? So just a little bit of advice in how to play my cards.
I don't think you really need to soften the blow, because it was good when I actually read something and went, we're not doing that. Like, it's kind of like, oh my God, they've got an idea there. But one of the things, if we say soften the blow, what we don't like is when someone comes in and says, you've got it all wrong. It's not working for these students. It's terrible. The outcomes are terrible. See ya. It's kind of like, truly, do we need someone to come in and bash us over the head and then walk away? So if you're going to do that, you need to say, and this is how you would work in this policy, this is how you'd change things. You know, these are my recommendations. These are maybe some of the framework that you could work with, you know, that sort of thing. Or, yeah, that actually helps. What we don't like is if people are critical and then that's it. It gives us nowhere to go and makes us, you know, do we really want to engage with them again when next time we meet with them, they'll just bash us over the head again and still not give us an answer, you know? So what we like is, we're okay with that as long as you give us something then where to go, you know, and it can't be, you know, it'd be great if tomorrow all schools did this and we had $100 million and this would happen. So we need some kind of practical ways for where we can move. That's okay.
Hi, I just wanted to respond to what you were saying before and also to the question down the front. I worked for a time as a consultant in a commercial research centre where, along with the Big Four, we tendered for a lot of state government research projects. And what you say is really true, but it's also really different, I think, state department to state department, like how much they want you to go and embed in a community and work with them, or how much they just want you to run in and skate across and do a few consultations and pump out a short lit review. So, yeah, finding out, and I think that's a really good thing to look at too, that tender process and understanding how the Big Four as well, the Big Four consultancy groups like EY and things like that respond to those government department requests for tendered research. If you look at that, you'll get a really big insight into what they're looking for, and particularly in the different areas. I don't know if you wanted to add to that or make a comment.
When I was saying we go out and do the research, I was talking about the department itself going out and doing the research and holding focus groups around the state. We do put out tenders for research to be undertaken, and it really depends. Sometimes if we've got time, that can be asking for fairly comprehensive kind of research and for you to talk to a number of focus groups and different kind of demographics across the state. But there's also the ones where we just want the quick. We want a literature review, we want it in 4 weeks, you know. Or they pick who that is that they want you to go and talk to. So I think it's kind of really depends on what's going on. But yeah, have a look at the tenders that they put out. They don't pay much money. Let me just put that out there. But sometimes, you know, it's good to take the little ones because that gets you into it. But yeah, you're right. Look, it just depends on what's going on. That's right, because you'll have several meetings before you go out. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying the networking is really the value, even though it isn't much money. It's that, especially if you then move on to a role where you've been doing that for a while, you get to know those people and you get to know what they're interested in researching, what they're paying people to do, and that maybe helps you in what you pursue if you go back to a university position or something like that.
Yeah. And there's a quote for tender, but there's also something that you can put out that says, I'm going straight to an offer to someone because they are the expert in the field, that can be up to $100,000 in Queensland. Now, there might be other people in that field, but they don't know. So it's kind of, once you get known, do the smaller ones. They go, look, we've worked with this person and they've done a really good job. You know, we've got a bigger thing here. Do we really want to go to someone that we don't know? Do we really want to go out and cast the field when we know that this person, they say they're the only person in the field, we've done a quick search, we can't find anybody else, we can go straight to them. So they have that there. They do a little bit of searching around for it, but it's one of those things that once you're in, you're kind of in, unless someone leaves the department. You know, you're kind of in with them. So it is a good way to get into the departments and to make connections.
We got time for maybe one or two more questions.
Great. Well, not great, there's no questions, but thank you.
Just want to say thank you very much for your time, Angela. It's been a pleasure and I've learnt a lot. And on behalf of AARE, I'd like to just give you a small gift. And that's a little thing for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Hi everyone. Hi. So for those of you who missed earlier, my name is Rosie. I'm the postgrad rep for the AARE. So if I haven't spoken to you, it's nice to see you here and hopefully meet you. So I'm just going to introduce our next speaker, Charlotte Pezaro. So Charlotte is passionate about primary teaching, science education, technology education, and working with teachers to become competent and confident teachers of science and technology. Charlotte has completed a Bachelor of Science, Psychology, a graduate Bachelor of Education, Primary, and holds a PhD in Science Education from the University of Queensland. In her research, Charlotte examined the claim made in many curriculum documents around the world that learning science helps people to make good decisions. Charlotte was a primary school teacher with Education Queensland for 6 years, teaching in remote, regional and city locations. She also developed and coordinated several courses in the primary initial teacher education programs at the University of Queensland. Today, Charlotte is proud to be working with teachers seeking to improve their confidence and capacity to facilitate inquiry experiences for their students in their classrooms. So please join me in welcoming Charlotte. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. It's so weird to hear yourself talked about, but not to you. It's also weird to realise halfway through the description that was written when I was working in my previous role. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. I'm Charlotte, as Rosie just told you, and I have a PhD. There was once a time, oh, whoops, hang on. I always forget to do that, the doctor part. That's still new. There was once a time when I didn't know what to do with my PhD, and one day, if not now, you might be at that same point in time. I'm going to tell you my story today and do a little bit of work with you to help you figure out what the answer to that question is for yourself. We're probably not going to get there today, but it's about the process, right? Not the end product. So as Rosie said, I did a Bachelor of Science at UQ in psychology. That was way back in the late 90s. And towards the end of that, I realised that nobody in their right mind should see a 19-year-old psychologist. And no one not in their right mind should see a 19-year-old psychologist. So I enrolled in the dual degree in education. I didn't mean to be a teacher. If you look back through the sort of artefacts of childhood from me that my parents still have, there's a lot of me standing in front of other children and telling them what to do. But we still didn't see that necessarily as the career choice. But I did enroll in the dual degree of education for science science education, to try and be a secondary teacher of science, because I had all of the subjects to teach physics and biology. Had a huge fear of chemistry. That's another story. I've got over that now. It takes time and therapy and work. But physics and biology I was all good with. But fortunately, depending on your point of view, in my very first practicum, they accidentally sent me to a kindergarten class in a primary school. So I dropped the dual degree because that was way fun, and graduated with my BSc, and actually came here to QUT. And back at that time, they had what they called a graduate bachelor, which was a graduate entry only 2-year program. It sounds a lot like the masters, but I didn't have to do the research component that we expect with a masters. So it was a graduate. I feel bad when I call it a masters because it's not a masters, it's a graduate bachelor. Anyway. 2 years later, I stepped into my first classroom, and I was very lucky. My first classroom was at Cherbourg State School, and the principal was Chris Zara. So I had a very good induction to teaching there. I learned a lot and very quickly. From Chris and Grace, his wife, and the wider teaching staff, I learned the value of high expectations, of valuing children's backgrounds and cultures, and to bring family into the classroom if I expected family to bring learning into their home. Those are lessons that I think are applicable in any context, and I have taken them with me to every school I went to since. I've been to since. From Chris, I actually began my first study of leadership, and I learned about leadership from him, about knowing yourself and the values that you hold and what it is that you can do and your limits. I learned about knowing your team and the work that they can do and how they can best collaborate. I learned about advocating for others, a lot about advocating for others, and also about setting up systems so that good work continues even after you leave. From Cherbourg, I went to Arakoon, because why not? And from Arakoon, I went to Weipa. And that was all before returning to Brisbane. So my experiences in Cherbourg, Arakoon and Weipa really shaped my beliefs about access to education and what is actually the essential parts of education, what it is that we can keep, and we need to keep, and we need to fight for, and what it is that we can kind of throw away. And I think that that has informed my practice and my decisions all the way along since as well. I actually left Arakoon very angry at the way that the vast majority of Australian people and systems continue to ignore the very real and ongoing impacts of colonisation on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples around Australia. But back in Brisbane, at another school, which was also started with an A and is completely a different context to Arakoon, but I won't name Ascot because then you might know what school I was at. I joined the Science Teachers Association. So, side note, I was actually really terrible at teaching science. I think this is an unspoken issue in science education. When you have a science degree, you're really good at explaining the Krebs cycle and how that helps your body to extract the energy that it needs, blah, 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 in detail, but not necessarily that big picture of there are things happening in your cells that help you to get energy from food, that allow you to continue living and creating new proteins and things that I couldn't explain science to the level that I could explain it now. So I was really terrible at teaching science, because here's a grade 3 looking up at me and I'm talking about the Krebs cycle. Who cares? Not particularly relevant. So I joined the Science Teachers Association actually quite naively to improve my science teaching practice. I found myself on the board because I'm a sucker for saying yes. And a lovely gentleman by the name of Dr. Tony Wright was sitting on the executive board of STAC. And he sort of pulled me aside one day in about early 2009 and said, "Would you ever consider doing a PhD, Charlotte?" And I went, "Sure, why not? Cool." At the same time, there was a job advertised from CSIRO Education in the Scientists in Schools program, which I'd been a teacher participant in. So I applied for that as well, and I started my PhD and that role in the same week. Someone recently, a joint colleague of ours, asked me what it was that I hoped to achieve with my PhD. Whether it was naivety or idealism, I didn't actually have any high expectations to begin with anyway, about changing the world or making a massive impact. I just really liked learning new things. I kind of saw my classroom as a research ground anyway. I'd tried this, and this is one of the wonderful things about primary teaching, is the flexibility means that you can try something, it can completely fail, and you can go back the next day and go, hey kids, remember yesterday when we tried that thing and it really didn't work and you didn't learn what I needed you to learn? We're going to try again a different way today. So I really enjoyed that research process in my classroom, and I thought, yeah, cool, we can formalise that, why not? But I always hoped that it would allow me to perform work that I was passionate about, that could be meaningful to me, and I remain committed to that kind of work. So that work was and remains the enabling of teachers, especially primary teachers, to think and teach well. I think we have a culture of underestimating all of our teachers, but primary teachers in particular, that I would like to turn around. So much of what I see today in education actually works against that goal. So I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but we have measures towards increasing accountability and compliance, which have eaten into teachers' time and energy for planning and developing worthwhile learning experiences for their students. So in response, what does the Education Department do? They provide extensive teaching and learning resources to schools, effectively dictating not only what is learned, the curriculum, but how is to be taught. Pedagogy, and because of the range of pedagogical and discipline-specific understandings and experiences across the massive cohort of teachers, these resources have had to be accessible and useful to the least experienced, least knowledgeable, and least motivated of primary teachers, and targeted for students in the middle of the spectra of interest, prior knowledge, and needs for learning. The implementation of this top-down determination has had the effect of removing opportunities for primary teachers to develop the necessary pedagogical understandings to teach, as well as weakening their capacity to address the needs and interests of specific students in their particular classrooms, effectively deepening the problem and deprofessionalising teachers in the process. Along with teachers' autonomy to develop and act plans for teaching young people, opportunities to develop the expertise that they need through experience and reflection have all but disappeared. To quote Dr. Peter Ellerton, who is the director of curriculum and pedagogy in the Critical Thinking Project where I currently work, if you have an idiot-proof curriculum, guess who's going to end up teaching it? Rant over, we're good now. I can step back off that high horse, we're all good. Okay. So my PhD allowed me to work as a pre-service teacher educator, which was one of the highlights of my entire career. And I think I did that well most of the time. I embedded regular opportunities to discuss the work of teachers and the profession of teaching with my pre-service teachers, the importance of critical thinking and decision making, even though it seemed at times that on prac they were not given any scope to exercise those skills, and professionalism in my classes. I believe that many of my pre-service teachers found this useful. The sheer number of them still contacting me to think that, allows me to think that this was actually useful for them too. And I did love that work. I love those conversations. So I'd like you to do some meaningful work with me now. This is a bit of work that you're going to do. You're going to do the work with the person beside you. So turn to someone beside you, find a partner. If you don't know each other, you better introduce yourselves because you're going to be talking a little bit. You might have to have a group of 3. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.75, 2/3, a half, 1/6, 0. You'll still have more time to talk. Just give us a second, okay? You're going to have 2 very structured conversations, dialogues, perhaps. In the first conversation, one of you will be the speaker and the other the listener, and then of course in your second conversation you're going to swap. Some of you might have done this before, don't ruin it for the rest of us. Now, the listener is only allowed to ask why questions. If the speaker says that they love to eat fried chicken, then the listener should ask, why do you love to eat fried chicken? The speaker has to answer the question as openly and honestly as they can, and then the listener can ask about the speaker's response again. So we go through this process to at least 5 whys. Okay? When you've reached either a deeply profound and meaningful answer that you don't think you can take any further, or gone as far as you can and not reached your deep, profound answer, that's okay. We will workshop that a bit more later. Then you can switch roles and begin the second conversation. Let me know when you're done with both conversations by turning to face the front, please. Now, the speaker obviously begins the conversation. Begin with the answer to the question, what work are you most passionate about? And I have an example for you here. So, Charlotte, what work are you most passionate about? I am most passionate about the work that I do with teachers, working with them to develop their pedagogical expertise. Why are you most passionate about the work you do with teachers to help them to develop their pedagogical expertise? Because teachers influence students' dispositions, attitudes, and values through pedagogy, and must do so deliberately and mindfully. Why must teachers do this deliberately and mindfully? You can see the picture here. Well, to quote John Dewey, a society with... Is that an ongoing joke in here? No, okay. Don't we like John Dewey? To quote John Dewey, a society with too few independent thinkers is vulnerable to control by disturbed and opportunistic leaders. Gosh, he was prescient. This is 100 and something years ago. A society which wants to create and maintain a free and democratic social system must create reasonable independence of thought amongst its young. So, Charlotte, your work is toward a society in which there is a free and democratic social system. Yes, that is why I do what I do. Okay, your turn. Go. Thank you for going from what may have been a degree of confusion from anywhere to 0 to 10 to profound statement in 3 minutes or less. Congratulations. Before we do move on, if you haven't already written down some semblance of coherent statement around what it is that you just got to in your notebook, you might like to do that. So another 30 seconds to write it down. We're going to come back to it in a little bit. So I finished my PhD in late 2017. It took me 3 attempts to submit it. The first didn't go through properly. The second was in 2018, but I hadn't changed the year of the thesis on the title page to 2018, so the third time had 2018 written on it instead of 2017. What did I do with it? Well, I was invited to fill a role at CSIRO Education and Outreach, where I had worked on the Scientists in Schools program 10 years earlier. Yes, it took that long for me to do a PhD. I really liked teaching. I did a lot of it. CSIRO Education Outreach is arguably Australia's largest provider of professional learning and support for teachers of science. And in this role, I was very lucky. I got to do some quite meaningful work in terms of developing teacher professional learning programs, curriculum resources, and assessment and feedback mechanisms for students, as well as an evaluation design so that we could take a look at the program and think hard and long about what worked within it to help teachers effectively and what did not. It was work that I was very passionate about and that I saw as valuable to helping teachers to think and teach well. That's what I was doing when Naomi invited me to give this talk today, which is what the précis or the bio that was given at the beginning of the talk described. Unfortunately, my role was cancelled at the end of July due to a little-known policy of the federal government about the number of staff that federal agencies are allowed to employ, known as the average staffing level. And as they were recruiting for my position at the time competitively, because I had come in non-competitively, the role was cancelled. The project was effectively sidelined and I didn't have a job. So in August, just after that, Naomi called me and she said, "What's your job title if you're not at CSIRO?" So on your program, it says Consultant, Dialogic Education Services, which is something I've completely made up. But run with, and there is actually a Dialogic Education Services website now, and there's some ongoing work. Because I didn't have a job, but I had enrolled in an MBA, because what do you do after you've finished a PhD? you do an MBA. My parents are still very confused about this. I wasn't initially, but I am a little bit now. I'm 3 subjects down. I do hope, though, to use dialogic education services, spoiler alert, I'm now in an academic role. We'll come back to that in a moment. But as in that academic role, I am allowed to do up to 6 weeks of consultancy outside of my role per 6 months. That's very generous. I don't know if that's at every university. Anyway, so I do hope to use dialogic education spaces to do some more of this meaningful work, to help teachers to perform their most meaningful work, which is in front of students in classrooms teaching, not at desks complying to paperwork requirements. I will do this through advocacy, through the creation of professional learning opportunities, the facilitation of professional dialogues in classrooms and schools, and setting up of online platforms to help teachers to collaborate. I also hope to help schools and teachers to evaluate themselves and their programs and their practices without the compliance metrics sitting in the background and the box-ticking exercises. I am starting to do this by providing opportunities for primary teachers and secondary teachers teaching out of field to develop their understandings of science through professional learning opportunities. I think this is important because people have criticised me for this already without asking key questions, but I am using a social entrepreneurship model, which means that this is not a for-profit consultancy. This is something that I hope will pay me for my time, and we all should be paid appropriately for our time, and that is one of the tricks of being a PhD candidate, is being paid properly for your time, but it means that it will never make more money than it needs to operate. In September, I started my current role, and now I'm a researcher with the Critical Thinking Project at UQ. I was lucky, and I have a footnote here. So I threw my speech to a critical friend, Adam Cuss at UQ, who's a first-year PhD candidate there in the Critical Thinking Project, because he told me he couldn't be here today. And I was like, oh, so how about you give me the feedback on this thing? He said, okay, yeah, I can do that. And because we work for the Critical Thinking Project, and we're all about the values of inquiry and feedback, I was like, I need feedback on depth, breadth, coherence, and anyway. I was lucky, and Adam has responded here, and I'm just going to read his response because I wasn't sure how to accommodate it in my speech. He says, I think you are shortchanging yourself in this section. You are a person who has the courage to take risks and move careers. In doing this, you've taken opportunities and developed networks that others would have said no. You've developed a broad set of skills that has opened up a range of pathways. Timing and opportunity is part of it, but you need the courage and skills to back it up, which you have. I give that to you not as a yay me, but also yay me, but also because I think that sometimes getting that feedback from our peers is really important. We forget that in a PhD we are developing really broad skills that transfer across a lot of roles, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. When we are aware of what it is that we have achieved and how it is that we got there, we're better able to sell ourselves. So Adam is telling me here to sell myself a little bit better. And in the meantime, the best way I could do that was by reading you what he said. But I will work on that. That's selling myself better, and I encourage you to do the same. The offer to work on the Critical Thinking Project as a researcher arose in a confluence of the right expertise, which is in thinking dispositions. That's what my PhD was in, sort of, mostly. Long story. It's a PhD. Do you want the elevator pitch? You know, at the beginning, Rosie said, I was in inquiry into the claim that learning science helps people make good decisions. Spoiler alert, it does not. Okay? So what I did was I looked at 7 factors of student thinking and attitudes and dispositions, and how they changed from the beginning of a course that was taught using inquiry to the end of the course that was taught using inquiry. A small subset of those students engaged with me weekly in what we call dialogic argumentation, which is a form of collaborative thinking where people sit at a table and try to solve a problem together with different perspectives, evidence, ideas, etc. In all of these dialogues that my students engaged in, not a single one reached consensus, but consensus is the goal. It's not the output. So having them work towards consensus meant that they had to work hard to give each other feedback on their reasoning, on their thinking, on their use of evidence, etc. So that's what the purpose of the dialogue was. The dialogic argumentation improved their reasoning, it improved their critical thinking, it improved their capacity and disposition toward using science and scientific evidence to make decisions. The inquiry in and of itself, and I'm talking from structured through to open inquiry, if you know what I mean by inquiry, did not. So the way that we teach matters. It's really important. Anyway, moving along. This job offer came from people that I knew. It was not an advertised job offer, which means in 12 months' time I will be competing for my role against anybody else who wishes to apply, and I encourage you to. But what that really means is that networking is important. It's important that you talk to people about what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it often. And not just people that you think might be doing something similar, but people that you think might be doing something different and one day end up doing something similar, like Naomi and I have been doing. So network, talk to people here, go up to that person that you think, oh my God, the first time I talked to Nicole Mockler, I was like, you're Nicole Mockler. I really like your work. I follow you on Twitter. And she was like, yeah, cool it, Charlotte, it's good. Yes, I follow you on Twitter too. Oh my God, Nicole Mockler follows me. So don't maybe embarrass yourself to that extent, but hey, okay. But do network. Network at AARE. Take advantage of those travel allowances that you get as a PhD student. At UQ you have to apply for one, but it's pretty much guaranteed you're going to get that $3,000. So go travel with it, meet people overseas. You never know where opportunities to perform work that is meaningful to you will come from. And network outside of academia as well. Most PhD candidates desire an academic career. Is anyone brave enough to put their hand up and say, yes, at the end of this, or now that I've finished this, I am most interested in an academic career? About a little bit more than half. Yep, that's about right. Or at least it's about right according to statistics, and who cares about statistics anyway. It's deeply unfair that I'm not one of them who desire an academic career, but I hold an academic position, and I recognise that. However, more than 60% of PhD graduates end up in non-academic roles, more than 60%. For some of you, that very idea might be a tragedy. I don't think it's a tragedy. I think it shows that our expertise, our skills and our capabilities and these things that we develop from our PhDs have value right across society. And there are lots of ways to enact that value. Indeed, this is what the research of renowned Thesis Whisperer, do you all know Thesis Whisperer? Good. Inga? Yeah, okay. So Inga and her collaborators, Will Grant and Hannah Suominen, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, they have found this. So what they've done, have you seen this research? It's really cool, actually. Some nods in the audience, that's cool. So they developed some machine learning software to assess job ads published on Australia's biggest careers website, Seek, over a period of time, and they analysed the key selection criteria from each ad. And they looked at it for what Inga calls nerdiness. And that is basically the capacity to perform research. They found that 25% of all job ads on Seek were seeking employees with high levels of expertise or research skills. 25%. That's not a small number. There are less than 25% of the Australian population with a PhD. So, you know, we're in here with a shot. Over 80% of these ads, however, did not mention the PhD as a qualification. So Inga and her team have developed a platform called PostAc that identifies job ads that might be relevant to PhD candidates and graduates. It's by subscription only to the university. So if you don't know if you have it, go to your graduate school and ask them and agitate until they subscribe to it, okay? As a PhD, you can always get a job. It's a highly valued qualification in any field, particularly where you have practical experience. Recruiters recognise this. So the other way of looking is to go to a recruiter, or if you do an MBA with UQ, you get a careers counsellor and then they go and help you find things, which is kind of cool too, but anyway. So some of you may be thinking, if not academia, then what? you've got your statement of your work passion that we've just developed together, sorted out, and hopefully written down in some kind of coherent form. By the way, this is not going to be a formal statement. This is just something that's for you. It's something for you to mull over and revise and think about. I actually have it up on my wall over my desk at home. I have a guest at the moment who's staying here for AARE, and she came to me this morning. She's like, because she's staying in my office, she's like, that thing over the desk with the weird words and the strange layout, what is that thing? It's my passion statements. It's a little bit nerdy. Anyway, so now we're going to develop a statement of the impact that you'd like to have. For example, if your passion or meaningful work is about enabling school leaders to achieve transformational change in their schools, and I'm thinking about Amanda here, perhaps your impact statement is something like, Australia's education system graduates students who are independent learners, critical thinkers and productive citizens. Sounds a lot like my impact statement, just a different direction for getting there. Think of an impact statement as the kind of vision of the future that you'd like to see come true. So, oh, that all came up at once. I didn't expect that. Look at the impact in the middle. We're going to now brainstorm 3 or 4 necessarily or enabling conditions for that impact to come true, for that impact to be felt or observed or seen. You're going to help your partner then, after you've come up with a few enabling conditions, you're going to help your partner to do the same. You're going to brainstorm for them. And the reason that we do this collaboratively is that we tend to think in ways that we have always thought. The person beside us tends to think in the ways that they have always thought, but that's different to our ways of thinking. So in getting our feedback from our critical friend beside us, who we may have just met or may have been friends with for a decade, we're going to be getting different ways of thinking, of reaching that impact together. So this is a kind of logic tree, okay, that we're going to be developing. Think about your impact as your passion statement, and we're developing those conditions, okay? 3 minutes again. Go. Okay. So this is, as I said earlier, a kind of logic tree. I'm sorry to interrupt your very productive conversations. You will be able to carry them on in breaks, etc. So for me, my impact, I would like to see a society in which there is a free and democratic social system. To do this, we need students who think well. I could probably have an arrow between flexible school environments to students who think well, because that's an enabling condition for that. We need new understandings of teaching and learning, or arguably old understandings of teaching and learning that are robust against some of I'm being a little bit cynical here, but the disruptors who think that technology can change education in any kind of substantial way, as if we learn any differently now than we did 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But we can see that there are lots of different roles that are involved in achieving this impact. So it doesn't matter whether I'm a researcher, or I go into policy, or I go back to the classroom, or I do something completely different, or I run my consultancy, or I do any of these things, or I work at CSIRO Education and Outreach. I am working towards that impact. So that, to me, means that my PhD and my work has meaning, even if I'm not an academic. And I hope that from this exercise, and you're welcome, of course, to carry on this exercise as much as you can later on, you don't need an academic role to achieve this impact. And if I interpret Andrea this morning, reading the tweets, I couldn't be here, but reading the, sounds like there's ways of making an impact as an academic, but there are also ways of not making an impact as an academic too. Your PhD will help you to get whatever role it is that you eventually get, and to perform it well. And as best as I know to tell you, that is what you do with a PhD. So thank you.
We've probably got 5 minutes for questions, if anyone's got any questions for Charlotte.
What you do with an MBA is a completely different question. Naomi's coming with a microphone. I think we want this recorded. Whoops.
So we need to keep...
Sure. Now that you're in your role at the University of Queensland, but you did an MBA, would you ever consider starting a startup for social impact?
Yes, I would.
And why?
it would definitely not be in any way something that interferes with teachers standing in front of their class in a classroom. To me, that is something that cannot be disrupted, as I've just said a few moments ago. However, there are things that can be done that can enable teachers to step away from some of the other stuff that might need to be done. I'm very wary of the data collection tools that are employed by mega corporations that would like to build profiles of students before they've even reached an age where they're old enough to consent, the Class Dojos and the Googles and that sort of thing, and I would not want to step into that area either. And actually that's one of my, so in setting up my consultancy, you have to have a privacy policy in Australia, and to me it's basically, I'm not going to collect anything that I don't need, and when I collect it, I'm not going to store it anywhere where anyone else can get it. But do you know how hard it is to do that? Like, it's actually really hard not to have people's data stored in a place where it's not 100% secure. So it's an interesting world. So yes, I would, but I don't know what it will be yet. Actually, I have got an idea. And maybe if you're interested, you could talk to me later or tweet me on Twitter. I have a lockdown account because of reasons, but you can follow me and I'll follow you back. Dialogic Edu, but I have this idea that we have the stupid, I'm not judgmental, that platform of teachers developing resources for other teachers. I would like a platform where teachers are teaching teachers, and so the platform has to be face-to-face. We have to be doing face-to-face professional learning because there is nothing like being in a classroom with people to learn. Face-to-face, excellent. And so if you talk to me face-to-face, I'll give you a business card. But I think that there is something to be said for helping teachers to identify their expertise, which is what the Critical Thinking Project helps to do, and why I'm passionate about that, and then sharing that expertise with others. And I think that's got to be the next thing. Don't steal my idea, okay? Moving on. Or help me build it. Yeah, thanks. Cool.
Any other questions?
I answered all of the questions.
Wonderful. So on behalf of AARE, Charlotte, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much.